Welcome to episode 193 of the Left Behind Game Club. This week, we play Citizen Sleeper. Let's get right into it.
You're listening to the Left Behind Game Club.
Welcome to Left Behind Game Club, our never-ending attempt to make sure that no game is left behind. I'm your host, Jacob McCourt, and today I have one friend with me. He is the host of Crossplay Conversations and Lukewarm Games. It's Luke Lewis. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Happy to be on this show today. Very fun.
Yeah, it's funny. We've got a Citizen Sleeper 2 show coming both in Crossplay and in Left Behind Game Club feed. If you're listening to this in the Left Behind Game Club feed tomorrow, there will be an episode about Citizen Sleeper 2, and that show's on Crossplay, and you're not there, but you're here, and I'm very thankful that you're here. Thank you for coming around.
Happy to be here. Excited to chat, fellow sleeper.
Fellow sleeper. Let's talk about Citizen Sleeper, a game developed by Jump Over the Age, published by Fellow Traveler. It's on a lot of things: Mac OS, Windows, Switch, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5, originally released on May 5th of 2022. We start the show like we start all of our shows with the fast pitch. It's a one-sentence description about the game that we are about to talk about. Luke, why don't you go first on this one?
Okay, I'm going to get a little existential on this one. I'm going to go with a sci-fi narrative experience centered around questioning one's own existence in society.
I love that. You went story, so I'll go more mechanical and say, oops, you got Baldur's Gate in my visual novel. There's a lot to unpack here, but before we do that, this game is on PS Plus and Xbox Game Pass at the release of this episode, so many different ways to play it included in your subscriptions. Luke, how did you play Citizen Sleeper?
So I did this one via Game Pass, played mostly on my PC though, mouse and keyboard, and then I did one session at the TV with my controller on Series X, just to switch it up for an evening.
Nice. I first played it much like you did, where I played it on Xbox Series X via Game Pass. I originally played this in, I think, January of 23, a couple of months after it came out. Shout out to our co-host, Joseph Hooper, because he was the one who pushed us to include it in our Game of the Year list for 2022 in the 10 slot. And frankly, if I'd played it, that would have been bumped much higher than 10, but it's on there. So I played it first time on Game Pass, and I replayed it when it hit PlayStation Plus on January 21st of 2025. So, hey, guess what? It plays great on everything. My understanding is there might be some cautions about the Switch version. Obviously, sometimes Switch versions have some slowdown and whatnot, but a lot of great ways to play this. So PS4, PS5, Xbox, PC, some great ways to play this one.
Oh, yeah.
Let's set up the world and the gameplay of Citizen Sleeper. Sleepers refer to human consciousnesses that are transplanted into what are called frames, where basically somebody's like, hey, I need money, and therefore I'm going to give money to the S&ARP Corporation to take an image of my consciousness and put it in this android body, and these android bodies end up just being corporate slaves to the corporation. And so in Citizen Sleeper 1, you escape from your captors, but your body has technological obsolescence built into it, where in essence, S&ARP has to give you a stabilizer every, let's say it's 20 cycles. I don't know the exact number, but every number of cycles, they're going to inject you with the stabilizer so that your body doesn't break down. Anything you want to add just about like what the concept of a sleeper is, Luke? If not, maybe you want to set up the world here.
Yeah, I think you touched on the base premise of what we're dealing with here, but the world is just, it's rather bleak but equally intriguing, I would say. You know, you're on the space station of the Eye, and you're meeting all these different characters, different walks of life. Mm-hmm. Fellow androids, real people, everyone kind of struggling to coexist. Aesthetically reminds me a lot of Blade Runner in a cool way.
Yep.
but very intriguing at a base premise of like, what's going on here? I want to uncover more.
Having listened to, and I'm going to link it here as a resource because it's quite good. Our friends from Fun and Games did a chat with Gareth, Amy, and Martin, where he talked through some of the inspirations, or Gareth talked through some of the inspirations of the game. Heavily inspired by Tabletop, heavily inspired by the dystopian world that we're slowly entering into with the gig economy. And so like those are the two things that I think of. Fan of Mass Effect, and all of that stuff kind of coalesces and creates this really dystopian kind of world. At the same time, there are these like really nice moments, these character moments and moments of hope that you'll experience, but not after your face being buried in the dirt. So that's kind of the world itself. I'd love to talk maybe about the gameplay in this one. You got dice play into this pretty heavily, right, Luke?
We do. This is a unique one for me because historically this genre, if you pitched me on this independently, not my type of game. Generally speaking, if I see dice or I see like chance-based narrative stuff, that's not usually something I gravitate towards. But as we mentioned, friend of the show, Joseph Hooper recommended it so highly that I definitely wanted to check it out, and it's been on my radar. And so when the second one was coming out, I wanted to jump in, play it in full. And I actually ended up really enjoying the gameplay. I thought it was a really satisfying loop once you get into it and you kind of understand it works. And there's an amazing risk reward to like, depending on what number of dice you have in a given situation, whether or not you'll take the risk to accomplish the task, or you'll play it safe and take extra cycles to accomplish something. And that said, in most tasks, you're running against a clock. So then you also risk not finishing the mission and progressing that story. But yeah, I ended up really enjoying it, and I think it adds an added layer of depth to the more visual novel style of the game. Like I think it all coalesces really well, and without that dice chance-based mechanic, it'd be a very different game. So I'm yeah. What did you think of it?
Yeah, like layered on top of that, because again, I'm also not traditionally a TTRPG person or someone that sort of engages with games with role elements. Like obviously all RPGs sort of have this like role element based in D&D. But if you ask me, hey, have you played Baldur's Gate 3? The answer is no. Because this is almost like, and again, I don't want to diminish through comparison, but it's got dice rolls that remind you of some of the things that you'd experience in a game like Baldur's Gate. But beyond the actual dice rolls, they've layered, the cycles element on top, where sometimes you just make choices by not being able to, make timers happen a lot. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you make choices just through the fact that you don't get to accomplish like a specific timer in time, and so it makes a choice for you. Consequence is at the heart of Citizen Sleeper, and so your character does not die. You will likely make it through the game you will make it through the game to the end, but your end will be very different than other people's ends.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into that and kind of what point you left off in the story. But I also want to shout out just the variety of tasks and gameplay experiences you're having, despite it all being rooted in the chance-based dice mechanic, where you're talking to folks, you're bartending, you're growing produce, you're having not action sequences in like a true real-time sense, but action sequences in terms of like stressful cinematic events are happening, and then you're impacting the way things play out in a really cool way.
I found a lot of the time you will just, for many cycles, and this is kind of how there'll be a task in front of you, and it'll be something like you said, go farm, or go work at the bar, or go work at this dock. And so you'll slot your dice into these tasks, and sometimes you'll need to slot 4, 6, 8 dice into them. And what's always cool about the characters is they always acknowledge the fact that the way the character moments are always set up is it's usually a character discovers like, hey, you've been working here at this dock or here at this restaurant for a while. Like, what's your deal? Oh, you're a sleeper. Let's talk about that. And that's like not I find like that's an interesting way to introduce characters, where a lot of the time, like in RPGs, they'll just come upon you, and it's usually like in a big moment where they're like, "Oh, who are you? Let's do this thing, and then we'll talk afterwards." Where here, it's like you work really hard, they acknowledge that, and then there's almost a warmth to your first interaction with most characters.
Yeah, to that too, the passage of time in this game is really interesting in a sense of like you'll have those moments where you start a new series of tasks or a new type of mission, and then you go several cycles doing that type of mission, or at least that's how I approach it. We can talk about like strategy and how you manage things as well, but I thought it was really interesting that, you know, in the span of 5-10 minutes, you're spanning multiple cycles, multiple days, and these characters are taking notice of that and that passage of time. But it's interesting, like as a player, you're not living multiple days, but it kind of feels like you are in a sense.
One thing I just want to talk about mechanically before we maybe talk about some of our favorite characters, favorite story moments, is beyond just the dice rolls that are controlled by like, hey, types of outcome. So if you have a 6 dice, for example, 100% of the time, wherever you slot it into, your outcome will be positive. That diminishes as you go to where if you have a 1 or a 2 dice, those die actually give you 50% neutral outcome, 50% negative outcome. So what happens with a negative outcome? Well, it depends on like the type of task that you're doing. Sometimes it's a safe task, sometimes it's a risky task, and sometimes it's a danger task, which means for a safe task, hey, you might lose some energy. But for a danger task, your condition may be affected. You may lose money. You may add additional cycles to the timer that you're operating on, or sometimes, jobs may have a fragility element to them. So if you have a negative outcome, let's say you're working on a ship and it's fragile, you get a negative outcome when you're on a dangerous task. You may actually affect the fragility of the ship, which may lead to a fail state. Obviously, you'll keep going, but you'll fail that task.
Yeah, I thought the way the game treated fail state systems was also quite interesting in that you can keep going, but it does impact kind of what you're able to do. And then when you end a cycle and rest for the day, when you're getting those dice resources back, you're traditionally not getting the good you're not getting a 6 dice, you're getting like a 3 or a 2 or a bunch of 1s. And so then that impacts like what you're able to do. So then I always felt when I got to that point, it felt like I was clawing my way back to society in a way that I think the game was very intentional about.
Yeah, you can really see how this game is based in like tabletop, where like a good GM never lets the game end. A good GM will never let your character die. And I feel like that's what they've accomplished. What Jump Over the Age has accomplished here is they give you a game that you will never explicitly fail at. But you definitely, depending on the way you approach it, certain paths may be closed off, or you'll get a less than stellar outcome, but will still lead to you finishing the thing. One other thing that I'll mention here is that in addition to your dice, there are also sort of energy bars, and there's a condition bar. Condition is tied to this technological obsolescence that I mentioned at the top of the game. You always have to be slotting or using a stabilizer every, somewhere between, I think, 15 and 20 turns, depending on how much energy you have. Those two bars sort of interplay with each other, where you always have to use stabilizer. If you don't use it, and imagine your bar goes on the top of the screen over your dice, you have 5 dice in your ideal state. As your condition gets worse and worse, you actually lose dice. So if you don't use a stabilizer for, let's say, 10 turns, you may end up with only having 2 or 3 dice instead of 5. And energy is just really sort of you converting food into energy for your sleeper. There's 5 bars there, and usually most turns you will lose 1 or 2 of them. So you just always need to be using chits to eat. Chits is the currency in this one.
Yeah.
Anything you want to talk about mechanically beyond that? Sorry, Luke.
Oh, I was just gonna add on. Once I got into the flow of things after a few cycles, I felt like I was truly in this flow state where I'm like, I'm going, I'm doing my task, I'm rolling dice, I'm running back, I'm eating, I'm sleeping, and then I'm repeating this cycle like really quickly. And I thought it was
Mhm.
particularly satisfying on mouse and keyboard because there's this like tactile feel as you're dragging the dice and doing all this stuff. So
The whole game takes place on one. I guess one of the only complaints I have about this game is the entire game takes place on sort of one space station that is almost like a very long line, like
it's
a
like a
very
vertical
long, narrow.
plane, yeah.
Yes,
Which
yes.
on mouse and keyboard, when you're like doing the trackpad, was
Oh,
really, like I said, the tactile feel, mouse and keyboard was very good.
yeah, because you have to use your left thumbstick to sort of move through the space station on console, and sometimes you almost have to use the D-pad and the left stick together. Where on the D-pad you may click into a specific location, whereas the left stick just kind of moves you through the space station. The one of the things that I just struggled with sometimes is you have your drives. So your drives in this game are your missions that will end by giving you upgrade points. Almost think of them like your quest lines in any major RPG. But the thing that I struggled with is sometimes I would forget exactly where a specific mission was taking place, because sometimes you'll have a cluster of, if there's one big, long, narrow space station, in a section of the space station, you may have 4 or 5 little areas that you can click into. And frankly, and look, some of them have different symbols. And if you have a conversation you have to have with a character, it pops it up on the UI in a way that's really obvious. But sometimes I found it difficult to figure out which exact building do I have to go in to do this thing again. Did you struggle with that?
I did, and I think the game does a good job of tracking your quests and letting you know like what's relevant to that quest. But I think we can get into it specifically when we talk about characters. But there were some character quest lines where I just couldn't figure out where I needed to go next, so I ended up pursuing other things, and then in some instances never getting back to that original thread. I also got sidetracked along this game because I'd run into a new character, and then I'd be like, well, this is interesting, or this is a new way to make money. And I don't know about you, but there were multiple instances where I was really strapped for cash, or
Yes.
I couldn't use that same source of income that I had previously been using, so I had to find a new plan. So I think I moved on from quest lines quicker than maybe a traditional RPG, just because I was living in this like survival mode of like, well, I need money to buy stabilizers, because if I don't have stabilizers, bad news bears.
I definitely struggled with money, I would say, in the first half of the game. And then I became flush with cash. But there was no middle. It was either, hey, I got no money, I got too much money.
Once I started bartending, that was the turning point for me. Very lucrative industry on the eye for me.
You can even gamble, I think, in one or two places on the eye, which you can lose some of your chits, or your cryo is the name of the currency, like formally. So you can lose money too. So I would say that I engaged a little bit of risky play with my money. I did.
Grow some space fungus out there.
Uh-huh.
Yep,
Uh-huh.
love it. The delicacy.
We've talked about some of the characters and some of the quest lines. This by no means is going to be a full deconstruction of every single story beat. But what I'd love to do with you is cover maybe some of your favorite characters, some of your favorite moments in this one. I'll let you go first, because I have one if you're not ready, but I'd love for you to go first.
No, I'm good. I think a lot of the characters stand out. I think the characters, first and foremost, were what I found most engaging about the game. Like, I'm enjoying the gameplay, and then I'm excited to see what happens next with this character. And I think the game does a really nice job about making it meaningful every time it introduces a new character, even if they're only interacting with you very briefly. I think the art direction, the stylized look of the characters, what they're wearing, it just really like grounds everything in the world. And I think for a game that, this isn't voice acted, this is text-based exchanges you're having with people, but I think the writing is really rich and really engrossing in a way that I wasn't expecting when I first learned about this game. But it's next level in a way that really impressed me. I think similar recently we got really into mouth washing last year. Very different style of game, but just in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like engrossing you in a text-based narrative, I would compare it.
Yeah, I every character was a little distinct, and most characters, even the ones that sort of have villainous intents, uh, you almost, I don't say you cheer for, but you endear yourself to. Even Ethan. I guess from this point, we are going to spoil the story of Citizen Sleeper. If you were curious about what it's like, pause this, go play it, come back. But now we're going to get into the spoilers of the story. Even Ethan, who is a bounty hunter that is chasing you, he's just sort of an idiot, and so you can't help but like him is not the right word, but you almost endear yourself to him more than you would a bounty hunter in any other game like this one, as far as like the world and story goes.
Totally. And I think the dystopian setting definitely set you up of like, even if you don't like a particular character, you understand their motivation, you understand why they're doing what they're doing in order to survive. Characters I did like, just to shout out, I really liked Lem and Mina, the father-daughter duo was wonderful. That quest line as a whole kind of symbolizes what I loved about the game, in a sense that you have this optimism, you have this heartfelt thing, this father-daughter, they're trying to get off the eye, they're trying to get on this space shuttle. You're a part of the crew building the space shuttle, and that is satisfying in and of itself. But then heartbreaking in the end when I wasn't, we weren't able to get on the space shuttle, and Lem kind of shuts down, and Mina's struggling and she doesn't know what's going on because she's a little kid. And I think that whole storyline just felt very relatable, of like the struggle to survive, the struggle to provide for your family, and then to have it all ripped away. But the ripped away part is what like set the tone for the game of like, oh shoot, even if I do everything right, this might not go my way. And that's quite interesting from a narrative perspective. Like, where is the rest of this story going to go?
Yeah, I mean, even the small moments in the Lem and Mina storyline, where Mina at first is very apprehensive because you are essentially a robot whose skin is nylon, and so you look very distinct and different compared to a human being. And so Mina is obviously standoffish with you because they're a child and they just don't understand. But as you do tasks of babysitting Mina, your interactions get warmer and warmer as you go. And this game does a thing that, and again, I came at this because of the interview that I listened to with Gareth Martin, but there's implied narrative in this game a lot where you are slotting the dice into babysitting Mina, and it is implied that you are playing together and your relationship is warming up. But the game doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't treat you like you're not well versed. It just basically says, hey, you're slotting these dice in. It is implying that you're getting, closer to this character. And so next time we speak, the relationship's going to be different, in a different place. And I just really loved the little things in this game like that.
Yeah, definitely.
I was a big fan of Emphis, Emphis, who like cooking and food weirdly, even though as a robot who can't enjoy food in the traditional way, food is a very important part of this game. And so Emphis has a stall where he makes food. And at a couple occasions, you can get specific mushrooms for him to use. And the whole thing with that relationship is you just tell stories. And so with Emphis, you tell them, what is it like to be a sleeper? Tell me about one of the memories. Because with these frames, the human consciousness that's transplanted into these androids, there's memories that are sort of phantoms that remain. And so sometimes, the sleeper will go, I've got this memory that I can't place. It's not mine, but can kind of tell it. And so with Emphis, you talk about that. And at one point, Emphis tells you his story. And that whole thing is just like, I was on the edge of my seat, even though I played this before, just especially when he tells you his story, which is sort of heartbreaking. Like, and the craziest part is, given the way the world is going, not the most implausible thing,
Yeah, totally. I loved the the vibe of the relationship of like you're the regular at the bar, you're the regular at the diner. With that one, I thought the delivery was awesome. Similar vibes I really liked. Tala, the bartender bar runner. That was one of my favorite like gameplay loops, and one that I ended up going back to quite frequently just to quickly make money. But the fact that you set up a mushroom distillery in the back and all that stuff, I thought was really fun and worked in tandem with the gameplay in a nice way.
I mean, given your background in restaurant management, I am not surprised by that in any way.
I just thought it was cool. I'm like, I don't gravitate towards restaurant management in a game, but I thought in this particular game, the fact that was a narrative through line, I was like, this is quite interesting, and I appreciate them. Like, she's like, we're gonna make our own mushrooms, and I was like, fuck yeah, let's do that. That's awesome.
What I appreciate about Tala is she was always just like, whatever, man, like, we're just gonna figure it out. We're gonna make a restaurant in the back and it'll work out. I'm like, people have business plans usually, and you're just leaping into it feet first, which, again, not every character had their own distinct personality, and Tala, that was theirs.
And there's the beautiful moment where she like finishes making the alcohol, and then she like calls you back to try it, and then you have a drink together, and it's just like, this is the dichotomy of this game of like the bleak societal, like, things are awful, but then you have these beautiful character moments that are just nice. Mm-hmm. This game is like weirdly cozy in a way that like you wouldn't expect on a surface level, that I really appreciated.
Yeah, and what I appreciate too is, like, the gender non-binary representation, the queer representation in this one. I really enjoyed like Bliss's storyline as an example. So there's just like lots of cool characters that are not just like dude, like a space dude and space girl, are there any other like I
have a couple to shout out, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing any of these, but Peake
sometimes you play these characters
Eshe,
and then you don't say them out loud.
Well, it's like,
so you're like,
it's similar to like if you read books as a kid and then you came back to school to like talk about the characters, and everyone had their own pronunciation of some of the names and stuff. But Peake and Eshe, we'll go with that, maybe. Mm-hmm. I thought that whole storyline was really interesting, kind of representing broader societal themes on the Eye, and this battle of like refugees versus kind of more of the corporate or overlords. I thought was pretty cool. There were some stakes to that one. They were trying to get supplies through to the refugees. And that whole sequence was one of the more suspenseful, and that series of missions had a lot of like, Sleeper, you have to come right now. Like, there was a lot of like urgency to those, which kind of heightened. And, there was one in particular where I didn't come right away because I needed money to get a stabilizer to be able to make it through. But then that affected, then I had less time to complete the time sensitive mission. So then things got a little tricky, but I really enjoyed that sequence as well.
Yeah, I think at some points, like, the fail state like has to push you forward, because you'll have a binary choice later that you need. Like, you can't completely fail and cut off that story limb, I guess. And so like I had that same thing where so you're talking about the DLC. So I played this game when it first came out, and there's 3 episodes of DLC that are a part of this, that are at the end of the space station that come with a warning. And the warning is, hey, this is late game content. This is the DLC we've added afterwards. Do not play this until like you're very late in the game. And so when I first played it in 2023, it wasn't allowed.
I may have breezed past that disclaimer, gonna be honest.
Well, yeah, and it's because like you need you basically need other timers to not be ticking and have time to devote to that section of the game. And so
that's very interesting.
When I first played it, only episode 1 was available. So I actually hadn't seen, what I appreciate about my second playthrough is that I got to see those episodes all the way through. And having played Citizen Sleeper 2, which we'll kind of tease and talk about a little bit at the end of the episode, some of the characters that are part of the DLC, episode Flux, for example, or episode Refuge, those characters, some of them end up in Citizen Sleeper 2.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Yeah. I won't spoil it for you, Luke, because I know that you haven't jumped in yet. But yeah, some of the characters, especially the ones in the DLC, end up in the second.
Nice.
game.
That's awesome. No, I'm excited to. It's a good tease because I'm excited to play too. Obviously.
Do you feel like you're the only person in your circle who wants to go deep about video games regularly?
We were like that too, until now.
Welcome to Crossplay Conversations, the brand new bi-weekly topical video game podcast from Luke Lewis,
Joseph Hooper,
and Jacob McCoy.
With many years of breaking it down separately on shows like the Left Behind Game Club, Player Podcast, and Lukewarm Games, the gang is finally coming together to publish their gaming group chat in audio form every other week.
Expect roundtable reviews of the latest games, profiles of upcoming indies, and insightful conversations about essential topics in the video game industry. All with a mostly positive, insightful, and fun style.
Help us out by subscribing on your podcast platform of choice to get the first episodes delivered straight to your feed.
And follow us on Twitter at Crossplay Convos for updates about the show.
Cheers and happy gaming.
Do you find yourself playing older games and wishing that there were new discussions about those games? Enter Tales from the Backlog. Hi, I'm Dave Jackson, and on each episode, I'm joined by a guest to break down those games that may be stuck in your ever-expanding backlog. Each episode looks at one game in depth, focusing on mechanics, story, music, and other aspects with no spoilers until a clearly marked spoiler wall in the middle. If you've played the game, go ahead and climb that spoiler wall and enjoy in-depth story discussions, and if not, jump out when we warn you and maybe go play that game for yourself. We have over 100 episodes in the feed, everything from Disco Elysium to Tunic to discussion episodes about how to get into horror games, and if games actually need to be fun, or if they have more to offer. I guarantee that there's something in there for everybody. Once again, that's Tales from the Backlog, available wherever your podcasts are found.
I want to just briefly touch on the fact that we were messaging a little bit back and forth while I was playing this, and I feel like I'm bad at this game. I love this game, but I feel like, objectively speaking, I am kind of bad at this game, and it would be interesting. I want to do a second playthrough at some point, maybe try a different character class just to see how that goes, but just like be able to manage myself better from the jump. And I think be able to accomplish more quickly, see things more, see the end of more of these character arcs. Because I had several missions where I failed the objective just because of kind of still learning the ropes, still learning the time management aspect, or like I'd have a negative outcome, which would then affect me and I would not be able to afford the stabilizer, or then I wouldn't be able, like, it was a domino effect in a lot of these missions. So I'd be curious to see kind of what I missed or what would go slightly differently if I was a little more prepared. But I also think that's part of the experience, is kind of, I'm glad I had my experience, if that makes sense, albeit a troubled one in some instances.
No, I think that's what the game does really well also is that they give you multiple character classes too. And what these character classes do is they essentially just give you a perk, and then they also there's 5 different skills in the game: engineer, interface, endure, intuit, and engage. And the tasks that you do typically focus on one of those skills. And depending on the way you set up your character, the 3 classes are machinist, operator, and extractor. One of your skills will be a +1 on a dice, and one of them will be a -1. And in this game, you can, as you level up, so as you complete your missions, as you complete your drives, as they're called, you'll get upgrade points that you can then dump into your character. So eventually, by the end of the game, you're probably going to be +1 on some of your dice rolls and +2, maybe even on 1 or 2 of your dice rolls. But when you start, one of them is -1 and one of them's +1. So between the early game, where you're probably set into a very specific set of tasks, and your perk, I think it leads to multiple playthroughs. I played this one the second time. It took me 8 hours. How long did it take you again, Luke?
Somewhere between like 10 and 11, give or take. My game clock was a little wonky because I checked out the game briefly when it came out, and then I started a fresh playthrough earlier this year, leading up to 2. So yeah, I think around 10-ish.
Yeah, and if you don't engage with that DLC, that DLC is probably an hour and a half of content minimum. So you can get through the core of this game in 6 to 8 hours, and it's a really cool and tight and great 6 hours as you play it.
Hell yeah.
Any characters or storylines that you want to touch on? I'd love to talk about Neovend, who is a vending machine who then becomes sort of a different character later on called the Navigator. Essentially, you befriend an AI that's inside of a vending machine when you start, and essentially get them to a place where you can remove them from that vending machine where their abilities to communicate with you are very limited. And then you take them out of that and can communicate with them and use them in the story later. I just thought that was rad.
I don't think I encountered that one.
Oh,
interestingly
okay.
enough, which to the earlier discussion, I think is kind of neat because then that makes me want to run another playthrough and then briefly check that out to see.
Well, I wonder then, because again, I know that this game has sort of a limited set of different outcomes, but with that, you go to the vending machine, take the AI out of the vending machine. They're called the Navigator, and you end up using the Navigator to combat some of the other more malicious AIs that are in the eye itself.
Yeah.
So I wonder, like, did you encounter, and again, this is a fun question that I haven't asked you yet. Have you encountered, or what happened with Hunter and Killer, the sort of AI protocols on the space station? You're looking at me like you didn't encounter them.
I don't think I did.
That's so cool.
I think that is kind of neat. I'm curious, like, we don't have to get specifically into the ending right now, but I am curious, like, where your story ended up, because I felt like, for me, I was kind of surprised because I think at one point while I was playing, I messaged you asking what was the main quest line that I should prioritize, because I felt like I was bouncing around and doing all these different things and having a really great time, but I was a little bit worried about timing just to, be ready to record this episode. And you said all of them were important, essentially. And so I was like, okay. So I just decided I'm just going to go with, like, what's interesting and what's most time sensitive. I'll just kind of go with the flow for this one. And when my story wrapped up and I rolled credits, I had multiple things in progress. And some of them were the DLC and some of them weren't. But, like, storylines that I didn't get to see through to the end just because I ended up seeing through what ended up being what made credits roll, which I thought was kind of interesting, because I don't, to your point, I think this game is kind of, it's ambiguous, and I don't think everyone ends in exactly the same place, which is pretty cool.
Yep. And what I think is pretty cool, and in the meantime, I'd check our Discord chat, because I sent you 2 characters, and I want to see if you encountered these 2 characters. No. In a playthrough, you did not. Okay, rad. So I do want to talk about this for a second. So the way that you end is you essentially, there's like one, I would say, main story. And the main story there is, hey, the S&ARP Corporation wants to reclaim you property.
Sure.
And so they are at first they send Ethan, who's sort of a bounty hunter, and you befriend the bounty hunter, or you like get to a place where you just pay him off, and he just kind of likes to drink at the bar and leaves you alone.
We had like a crazy bar fight in mine. And,
you did?
Over a gun. Yeah.
Yeah, we had that one too. And eventually, like, they essentially S&ARP takes bounty hunting inside the company. Like, instead of outsourcing it, they decide to hire someone to do all their bounty hunting. So I would say the main story, and I should have been more direct with you here, Luke. I was trying to be coy about it.
No, I appreciated that. I think the ambiguity helped in a sense that I was just like, let's just take it as it comes.
You eventually get to a point where the biggest end game timer is, hey, S&ARP's bounty hunter that's internal is coming for you. And you either need to do one of 3 things to not have the game end in a negative place. You need to get rid of the tracker that's inside of you. You need to get off of Erlin's eye, or you need to get protection. So those are sort of the three outcomes. And I kind of put myself in a position where I had two options, where getting off, I could get off the eye with Lem and Mina, because even though you sort of get you get scammed with like getting off the eye, there is a way to get off the eye.
Interesting. Okay.
So you have to like
I kept trying
have
to
a
go
lot of
back
things
to
come
them,
through.
but then he was like, "Come back later, sleeper. I'm mad," and so I went and did different stuff.
So there's a separate character. That separate character is what is his name? Castor. So essentially, Castor is an inside man. You don't really know. They have this ambiguous sort of role where they want to get you on that spaceship, and so there's one thread of the story that you can essentially act as Castor's inside man on this spacecraft that is going to colonize a new planet far, far away. And as long as you provide him data, he will let you, Lem, and Mina get on the ship.
Cool. Okay.
So that's one way. And one of the other ways is to remove your tracker. And so that follows Feng, who's almost one of the first people that you meet on the space station, going through a storyline that involves him. But one of the best outcomes for that storyline is getting this AI Neovend, who's named the Navigator, to get rid of some of the more malicious AIs on the space station. And I don't want to go into specifics there, but it basically is, hey, you get the Navigator, you get rid of some of the bad AIs on the space station, and that leads you to a more positive outcome with Fang.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like I should tell you how mine wrapped up, or like what I was doing, so then you can
want to
put
ask
it
you
in
that.
context.
I do have one question
please,
first.
Sorry, I'm not trying to jump ahead.
No. Because I do want to hear. So on the space station, there's almost two levels to it. There's the top level, and there's almost like a data stream that your sleeper can see, where if you hit the triangle button or the Y button, depending on what console, or I'm sure there's a key on PC, you can enter into like seeing what the data stream of Erlin's eye is like. And there you can do a bunch of hacking to either get data, open specific like data gates and whatever. Did you play a lot on that level of the eye?
I think
it turns
so.
white and you do a bunch of hacking.
I think so.
Okay.
Sorry, some of we've said the word ambiguous, and I think some of the parts of this game feel a little ambiguous because it's unclear which one contributes to which thing, if that makes sense.
Tell me about how your game ended, and then
Sure.
I'm going to come back to this data stream piece later.
Okay, so the way my story ended up wrapping up was I was doing a bunch of missions with Bliss, and we had our first big mission, and that failed. And so then I went away for a while, did other stuff. Then more Tease came and found me, brought me back. We did another series of missions, and then it ended up that Bliss got hired by the bounty hunter and Kita.
And Kita, I think is how I would say it. Yeah.
And so then after we successfully repaired that ship, she offered me a spot on the ship to go with her. And then I had the choice of like, do you get on or do you not? So that's ended up being my out.
And I mean, that's one of the coolest parts about this game is the trophies and achievements. There are, I think, somewhere in the realm of 3 to 5 ways that you can sort of finish the game. But even if you finish, if you hit continue, what I appreciate about this game is they really stick you with your choices. There's an autosave. You can't save scum in this game because essentially
there were a couple times I tried to. Yeah.
Essentially after you make a decision, it saves, and so you're stuck with that. And I love that choice so much because typically it's not like, I lost a limb. It's typically just like, man, that story path is just going to be either way harder or I'm just going to lose that story thread. I think I only really failed one on my second playthrough, one storyline, and it involved Dragos. Like I failed that storyline, and frankly, I don't know if there's even a way to pass that storyline, but did you pass that story? That's like the first. Dragos is the one with the
hard
mask
no.
and the
hard no. Yeah. That was when I was definitely still figuring my stuff out and not quite managing that balance. Like, I think I wasn't using each run enough, if that makes sense. Like, I was like, oh, I only have 2 dice, so that's not enough to really do anything. I'm going to go to sleep and not like build up resources. Not managing my time well early on was a thing that happened for sure.
But frankly, like you won't on a first playthrough, and even on my second playthrough, given it's been like 2 years since I played, it's really hard to min-max the start of the game because the game doesn't hold your hand.
Totally.
It tells you how to play, and at a basic level, it tutorializes itself just enough. But I find the series does not hold your hand, and so if you don't know how to play, then at first you will just not know how to min-max stuff, and some of your drives at the outset you will just fail.
And I think that's part of the experience, though. Like, I don't look back at the game negatively because of that. To me, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting that the game immediately had stakes, immediately had consequence, and just never let up in that aspect.
I think that really, like, there's at least the credits that I know is there's the Bliss and Enkita one of leaving the Erlin's Eye that way. You can leave with Lem and Mina on that spaceship that's colonizing, I think from Erlis Corp or whatever that's colonizing a farther moon. You can also get there's a whole storyline with Rico, who has a commune of folks that just are gardening on, the Greenway, one section of the space station, and you can just sort of be one with the AI that is on that section of the space station, and then there's also a way out in the DLC. So I know that there's at least minimum 4 like passing states or like positive outcomes, but I would imagine that there's also like fail states, which that would suck if at the end of the game, and I'm gonna double check this because I've not had a complete fail playthrough,
like a quote.
But I would imagine that you could also
ending.
get captured. I'm assuming if you play so horribly that SNRP comes for you and you don't have what you need, there's probably a state in the game where you get captured. There has to be.
I think so, because Maywick, the like bounty hunter character that it's counting down to ominously the arrival. Yeah, I had a super bad first encounter, but then I got off the eye before I ever had anything else happen with that storyline. So yeah, it's interesting thinking about like if I had stuck around and that had played out.
Yeah, it sounds like the Maywick stuff has 3 different outcomes. If you don't remove your tracker, he'll ambush you at your house.
That was my yeah.
And then you'll get wounded and you'll be able to kill him. There's also you can also with Ethan use Ethan's gun at the bar to kill Maywick. So it looks like even here, at least from what I can see online, is that there are 3 outcomes and they don't lead to a fail state.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the first game here, some of our favorite moments. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the art and the music here.
It's so good.
It's so good. The music, especially from Amos Roddy, I have been listening to it working nonstop. It just is... it's music that like is almost lo-fi, and I don't want to diminish like how good it is, but it's lo-fi, but it almost has like a heartbeat of work in it. So it's just like so good at getting stuff done. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I think this goes back to my earlier point about just getting into a flow state with it, as I think the music absolutely locks you in, but isn't at all stressful. It just sets the tone really nicely, and it has a synthy sci-fi vibe to it, but it is just the perfect amount of just pulse. Here we go. Lock in, everybody. But yeah, I really loved it.
And I always found, depending on what I was doing or what I was going through in the game, the way it was, the game's programmed, the music is programmed, the right song always hit for the right moment. Like there's that song that's like really up tempo when you're like, moving towards a conclusion of a storyline. And then sometimes it can get really spacey when you're just exploring. So even the way the music was implemented was rad.
Definitely.
And then shout out to Guillaume Singlin, who did the art for this game. I had always said, and I've said this a bunch of times, but if Citizen Sleeper were to, sort of go, I know we were saying transmedia was the term that we use to talk about properties that ended up in multiple places. If we decide to do more Citizen Sleeper 2 stuff or Citizen Sleeper stuff, at the time of recording, it was announced, I think in PC Gamer, that the intention after Citizen Sleeper 2 comes out is for them to work on a TTRPG, almost returning to like Gareth's roots of like, hey, I really love games like Blades in the Dark. And so to take this Citizen Sleeper world and turn it into a tabletop is what I want to do. Made me sad not to get a third game, but at the same time, I could definitely see this being an animated series, being a comic, and that's based off the strength of the art. Like, this screams Image Comics to me.
Oh yeah, totally. This is one that like, I know Lost in Cult did a physical release with art from this game. This is one that I would 100% buy an art book or a framed print, or just aesthetically. It's so striking and just really locks you in. And I think between the engaging writing, the music, and the visuals, this game is just firing on all cylinders.
I agree. So at the time of release of this episode, Citizen Sleeper 2 is coming out tomorrow. In the Left Behind Game Club feed, our Citizen Sleeper 2 episode, hopefully, fingers crossed, is also coming out tomorrow. Just to give you time to listen to this one and then the second one. Luke, you have not played it, but you do have code for it. I have played through the entirety of Citizen Sleeper 2 already. So the thing that I want to just maybe tease out is the connective tissue, or what players should expect in the second game, if that's okay.
Definitely. No, I'd love to.
So without going into major spoilers for Citizen Sleeper 1, some of the characters, I've mentioned it before, end up making appearances in the second game, which is rad. I won't spoil exactly who, maybe just one in saying that like Bliss ends up in the second game.
Cool.
They are in the trailer so that won't be a huge surprise. But the big difference with the second game is that you can essentially travel the starward vector. So instead of having one long location, you have a ship and you go to different like space stations and planets. And so imagine that like a cluster of 4 to 10 different locations end up being a planet, and then you have maybe 10 of those throughout the entire game that you travel in between. You have to start collecting fuel as one example, supplies as an example to keep your crew fed. And one of the biggest changes is that in this game, you end up making friends and you find people on Erlin's Eye that you end up working with for the entire game, but they don't like join your crew. You're very solo. In the second game, much like the way I felt about Mass Effect 2, is you're building a crew and going to do a very difficult mission. In Citizen Sleeper 2, you're building a crew. So folks will join your team and you'll be able to take contract missions where you go and take these people out on those missions. You choose between them and take them on missions with you.
That sounds dope. That sounds like Mass Effect 2. That's awesome.
Let me tell you, as someone who has played through the entirety of Citizen Sleeper 2, it is the most Mass Effect 2 game I have played since Mass Effect 2.
Oh man,
yeah,
I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's I think of Citizen Sleeper really fondly and say like this is a 9 out of 10 video game. It just really left me wanting more. The way the DLC is implemented now that the full game's out there sometimes confuses some players and it doesn't hold your hand. But if you like Citizen Sleeper 1, Citizen Sleeper 2 is just more of that, and the writing somehow is even better in Citizen Sleeper 2.
You're saying all the right things, so I'm very excited to dive in. Can't wait.
Yeah, so again, I've got a piece of content coming out, both in the show that we do, Luke, the Crossplay Conversations feed, and this feed, where we're going to talk about Citizen Sleeper 2 with friend of the show, Adam Gumbert. So he'll be on there. We've both played it, so we'll talk through that. You'll see that in this feed tomorrow. It might already be there if you're listening to this after the fact, but you can also check it out on the show that Luke and I do together, Crossplay Conversations. Speaking of crossplay conversations, Luke, I actually, before we do that, I just want to see, do you have any final thoughts about Citizen Sleeper before we close this out?
It's really rad. If you've somehow listened to this far and you haven't checked it out, highly recommend. Not my typical game, but made me definitely more intrigued to experiment within the tabletop genre, this style of narrative.
Yeah, the game's phenomenal. It is a must-play. If you have Game Pass, if you have PlayStation Plus, you have no excuse. Please run out and get Citizen Sleeper. I mentioned Crossplay Conversations, Luke. That is the show that we have done together, somehow over 40 episodes already. If folks want to find you and find that show, where can they do that?
Hell yeah. You can find Crossplay Conversations on all podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube with the video version at Crossplay Convos. You can give me a follow on Blue Sky, pretty much the only platform I'm active on these days, at Lukewarm Lewis. You can find all my podcast shenanigans and other stuff there. But thanks so much for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah, I mean, you've been on a couple other episodes, so we're obviously always loving the fact, or always loving to get you on the show. You can find all things Left Behind Game Club on the internet. We are not using Twitter anymore because that place is a hellscape. You can find us on Blue Sky. That's where we're going to be updating about the show. Just type in Left Behind Game Club, you will find it. You'll also find me there. I'm jacob.bsky.social. That's all you'll find me on the old Blue Sky. If you enjoyed the show, please do us a favor. Give us a review on your podcasting platform of choice because it really helps. And if you want to interact with the community, talk about your experience playing Citizen Sleeper 1 and 2, you can do so at leftbehindgame.club/discord. That is our show, and that, my friends, is one less game left behind.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.